Hi, everyone, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone to lead up in a down economy. This is the second webinar in our webinar series, Rise Above the Downturn. So, our speaker today is Dan Rust. He is leading uh, leadership and development at Infopro Learning. He is the vice president. Over to you, Dan. Welcome you.
Excellent. As we get started, we're going to begin with a very brief video. Thank you, everybody. I do have a specific intent behind sharing that video. We'll reference that coming up in the next few minutes. Obviously, it's a video of a distant thunderstorm on a broad prairie. So, as we are thinking about leading during times of economic downturn, I want to start with a question. What kind of leadership, from your perspective, do we need? What kind of leadership style do we need? Of course, there are four, I would call them common approaches to leadership when there's an economic downturn. I see some leaders who are, in fact, optimistic cheerleaders. Rah, 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 go, 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 yay, yay, yay. Leading the charge very optimistically and energetically, which is, I'm not judging any of these styles. I'm just saying I do see that some leaders respond as optimistic cheerleaders. I see other leaders respond as paranoid taskmasters. Suddenly they get very engaged, very micromanaging, very interested in what everyone is doing, very controlling. And again, I'm not judging. I'm just saying I do see these characteristics come through. I do see cynical executors or executors, people who take the OKRs, take the KPIs, take the projects, and absolutely make sure that we execute every project flawlessly, with perhaps the intent that, hey, if we just execute flawlessly, we'll achieve our goals no matter what the economy is doing, perhaps. And then we also see insightful visionaries, people who do step back and observe, step back and discern, what's happening with the economy, what's happening with the organization, spend a lot of time thoughtfully determining what might be the best approach. And I'm not saying that any one of these is better or worse, and I'm not saying that necessarily a combination of these is the right model. There isn't any one particular model that's perfect for every single situation. But these are the four characteristics that I do see coming out of people, coming out of leaders when they're responding to a downturn in economic circumstances. And we'll talk about this more in a bit. But I just wanted to open with that. Let me introduce myself for those of you who I do not know, and I recognize a couple of individuals who have logged in who I do recognize your names. I'm talking about you, Justina. Good to at least see that you're out there in the virtual universe watching today. Hello. I'm Dan Rust. I'm the Vice President of Global and Commercial Development at Infopro Learning. I also host the Leadership Disrupted podcast, which you can find on Spotify and almost any other major, podcasting platform. I'm the author of the book Workplace Poker, which is it's a guide to navigating interpersonal dynamics in the workplace. And I share that just so that you understand as we develop webinars like this one, I'm pulling from a broad body of knowledge and body of work to pull a webinar like this together. At Infopro Learning, we have also a broad library of leadership development programs. These are off-the-shelf programs ready to deploy either virtually as virtual facilitator-led or as on-site classroom-led programs. These are not e-learning courses. These are interactive, high-touch, experiential workshops that we facilitate for clients. And I like to share this again because I think it is important to understand the context from which today's content comes. We had a webinar last week called Skill Up in a Down Economy. It's focused on deciding, which specific skills should you or others build up during tough economic times. Today, we are sampling from a course that we've developed recently called Lead Up in a Down Economy. Now, this Lead Up in a Down Economy course, the full course, is 6.5 hours of content. So what I am doing today is I've been curating content from the full course in order to deliver a really strong 50 or 55 minutes for those of you who are logging into today's program. If you want more details on the full course, Lead Up in a Down Economy, you of course are welcome to reach out and we will provide you with those details and that full complete learning journey. In addition, at InfoPro, we are known for co-creating content with our customers. So while we have these broad off-the-shelf programs, I would say 70% of the time when we're delivering content to clients and customers, it's not off the shelf. It's a co-created content that leverages our intellectual property and some of the client's intellectual property, where we work together to create something that we deploy for them individually. So that's enough said. I just needed to do that little commercial to pay for my supper, so to speak. So now let's talk about the down economy. And I was gathering information going back, several decades at the overall economic cycles. And it seems like in 2025, we have a bit of a unique economic downturn because depending upon who you're listening to in the overall news and media, there will be people who will say there's really not an economic downturn. The economy might be soft in some segments. And there are others who will say, well, I see softness coming up in the near future, but right now things are pretty much okay. But then we talk to others who are absolutely experiencing tough times, downturning times right now in their world today. So there are some things that make today's economic softness somewhat unique, and we'll be talking about that later in the session as well. But what we do know is that the externals, the externals of the economic cycle, moving up and down and up and down, the externals can sometimes mask challenges with strategy, for example. There are some organizations where the strategy may not actually be all that fantastic, but because the market is rising, they tend to rise with the market. Then, of course, they may fall with the market as well. But external economic conditions can, in fact, mask. They can mask good things. They can mask challenging things. So sometimes it's important to pay close attention to our local economies, as well as our national economies, as well as our global economies, and keep our finger on the pulse of what's really happening, because we want to make sure that we are not simply being fooled into thinking things are a certain way because of the broader economic circumstances. And then sometimes what happens is a change in the externals can suddenly reveal, maybe our people strategy wasn't as fantastic as we thought it was. Maybe our product strategy wasn't as evolved as we thought it was. Maybe our financial or our compliance strategy. So what oftentimes happens is a change in economic circumstances suddenly reveals maybe the king does not have as many clothes as the king thought that he had. So again, that's just something to think about in terms of what has, if your organization is experiencing a shift in economic circumstances, what is that shift revealing about your organization, about your strategy, about other elements of your organization? And so the focus of today's um, session is how to lead during an economic contraction, whether it's a severe contraction or it's a broad, deep contraction. How should one's leadership approach, mindset, style evolve? And the reason I specified non-pandemic contraction is because the contraction that was driven by the pandemic, I think, was a truly once in a lifetime unique circumstance that was suddenly upon us that impacted all businesses. And I don't know that it is a great example in terms of how do we need to evolve as leaders. So, what many of you may be experiencing as leaders in your organizations, if you are experiencing a downturn right in front of you, what you may be experiencing is reduced budgets, reduced resources, reduction in people. You may have projects that are being either delayed or postponed. Your own clients and your own customers may become more cautious. In fact, that may be the biggest impact for some of you is that your clients, your customers are reacting to the uncertainty and the uncertainty is changing their buying patterns. And so if your clients' buying patterns is shifting, then of course that's going to shift your business as well. Your employees become more fearful. The leaders above you may become more demanding, like I shared at the very beginning, in terms of becoming more execution oriented or more of a micromanaging taskmaster. And again, I think it's important that as leaders, keeping our fingers on the pulse of the economic downturn, even if it's only a modest downturn, even if it's just barely the beginning of a downturn, even if it might not ultimately be a downturn. I talk to leaders every day, and I do speak to a fair number of leaders who will say, I'm hearing about uh, challenges, but we're not seeing it so far in our market, or we're not seeing it so far in our consumers' behavior. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, we manage to weather through this. And then, of course, I talk to other leaders who are absolutely experiencing this. So it's important that you are the expert on you. You know your experience. But also, I think this webinar can also bring you some of the perspectives or experiences of others in their economic situation. So if any of you feel comfortable sharing in the chat what you're experiencing, I know we have a global audience on this webinar right now. So if you're comfortable sharing, hey, what's happening on the ground in your world? Is it a light downturn? Is it a severe downturn? Is it just rumors of an upcoming downturn, or maybe just the opposite? Maybe, in fact, your organization is absolutely booming in today's times. Of course, we'd love to hear about that as well. So I see we've got a couple of people typing. Let me just pause and see what. Okay, we've got from Peter, we've got severe with multiple causes. Bianca is typing. And I suppose it makes sense you wouldn't have logged into a webinar called Lead Up in a Down Economy if you weren't experiencing some degree of a down economy. Bianca says, acquisitions and changes in culture depends on the direction leadership goes. Thank you for sharing that. So the video that I played at the very introduction, there's an intention behind that video because that's a video of a storm far off in the distance. And one of the big lessons that we have ourselves learned, but that I like to impart to leaders is that in terms of adjusting or evolving your leadership approach in response to a down economy, it's important to start sooner rather than later. When you start thinking about economic contractions, economic challenges, and start preparing your own mindset and your own leadership actions, the sooner you begin, the more resources you have available to you. If you wait until the sky is falling, if you wait until everything is crashing, you have far fewer resources, you have less time. Bianca says technology and agentic initiatives are causing some anxiety. Absolutely. I think that's probably a universal experience. So I want to introduce you to the concept of the reading early signals in order to gain the most possible value from the signals that you're reading. There's the concept that I'm showing on the screen here is that the signals that you read off in the distance, the thunderstorms that you see off in the distance, the value of those observations is much higher when they are off in the distance. If you're one of those leaders who can read the signals and get a sense of what does this mean for the market, for our employees, for our business in general, the sooner you observe signals, the sooner you discern signals, and the sooner you take action on those signals, the better off you're going to be because you will have more strategic options if you're taking action earlier. That's the essence of this point. I love this quote from Peter Drucker. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And this brings up one of the challenges of a webinar like this. As I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, this webinar is based upon a full day course that is highly experiential, highly interactive, has lots of dialogue and discussion and exercises that people go through. The nature of a webinar like this is it's kind of one way. It's one person talking for about 50 or 55 minutes. That person happens to be me in this case. And the facilitator in me is very uncomfortable with just talking and talking and talking, but it is the nature of this webinar. So I'm going to share as much value as I can with you, um, taking or distilling content from that full, interactive one-day program. So I'm going to apply the concept of the sigmoid curve to strategy development. The sigmoid curve is this concept where your particular business strategy produces a particular level of successful result. And oftentimes what we see is organizations may spend many years, many decades operating with a specific strategy, and that strategy produces good, consistent results for them until it starts producing diminishing returns. And many organizations do not make strategic shifts until they see a downturn in the results that their strategy is producing. The concept of the sigmoid curve is that you actually begin making adjustments before you see that downturn. Because if you wait until there's a downturn, again, you're going to have fewer resources to respond to. And then you're going to be in one of those organizations where you see economic ups and downs, highs and lows. So the concept of starting sooner is to begin planning for the downturn before the downturn ever even happens. And sometimes what happens to us is if we're experiencing success, and I recognize a number of the names on this webinar, and I know that the organizations each of you works for, I can at least name 3 of them right now, have experienced long-term success for at least the past 5 years, if not the past 5 to 10 years. But sometimes what happens if we experience success over a period of 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, it can sometimes create what I call a frozen mental model, where you figure if it's not broke, then why fix it? Why do I need to experiment when what I'm doing currently is working as well, is working well? However, if we don't continuously experiment and try new things, we can become trapped by our own blind spots. And if we have this unconscious assumption that success now means success next year, which means success in coming years, that assumption of the way things have been is the way things are going to be, it ends up having us focus more than on internal priorities. And we end up not being as innovative as we potentially could be. We become risk averse because what's the point of taking a risk if things are working out well as they are right now? Sometimes those of you who have said you're currently experiencing an economic downturn, sometimes that downturn is what we need to prompt us to take risk, to prompt us to try things that are a bit outside of the box. Now, again, the ideal time to begin taking risks and adjusting strategies and experimenting with new approaches is before you experience a downturn. In fact, there's a big case to be made that an organization should be constantly experimenting with new strategies, constantly experimenting with new approaches, constantly experimenting with new products, new technologies, new priorities, because that prepares you for a time when the existing strategy might start to produce diminishing returns. So the goal is to launch that second curve before the need is absolutely apparent. That's the concept of the sigmoid curve. And I will tell you, if you want to learn more about the sigmoid curve, just go to your favorite AI agent, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Grok, whatever it might be, and just ask the agent, explain the sigmoid curve concept in detail, give me some examples of the sigmoid curve in action, and it'll be happy to answer you, because the sigmoid curve is a very well understood model in today's business world. It all boils down, though, to this ultimate challenge. The highest probability of a successful strategy development, like a new strategy, a new approach, it exists while your current strategy is still adequate, while things are still going well. That's the best time to innovate, when life is good, because when life is good, you have maximum resources, you have maximum time. People tend to communicate a little more clearly and think a little more clearly if they can get out of their frozen mental models. Unfortunately, though, that's exactly when motivation to evolve is at its lowest, because life is good. So why change? Life is fantastic. So why evolve? So that is the ultimate challenge. When you experience what some people call the curse of success, um, it can be a formidable set of obstacles because it gets in the way of innovation. It gets in the way of driving change. But if you wait until you begin to fail, if you wait until you're at the end of that sigmoid curve and things start to downturn, the motivation for change may be stronger, but you will have lower chances of success, primarily because you have less time and you have fewer resources to succeed. So there's a natural tension to the sigmoid curve. And what we would do if this was a full-blown workshop, this would be the point at which we would have a deep dive discussion answering this question: where is our organization currently on the sigmoid curve? What are we currently doing about it? What signals are we seeing? What are we hearing? Are we adequately addressing it? What might we do? What can we do to address and to begin a new process of evolving our strategy into the marketplace, and perhaps developing some interesting experiments, things to try and learn from. So that's the ultimate lesson of the sigmoid curve. And for me, this book that was actually published, I think, in 1999 or 19, it was 1999. That book by Andrew Grove, the chairman of Intel, it's a fantastic, oh no, it says 1997. I see it right there on the screen there. Okay, published in 1997. Honestly, this book was instrumental in me understanding the concept of healthy paranoia. What Andrew Grove advocated for was leaders who are constantly looking for the storm in the distance, listening to the thunderstorms off in the distance, leaders who would be paranoid and who would amplify those potential challenges, because by the time the storm gets to them, their organizations were very well prepared because they had more time. So that comes back to the very first message: start sooner. So, but I will ask you this. Let's go back 6 months, back when life was great, your business was growing, everything was fantastic. Assuming that's the way it was 6 months ago for many of you. If you had seen a listing for a course that said "Lead Up in a Down Economy," would you have attended? I'm going to say most likely not, because for most of us, we're not prompted to start thinking about a downturn until we experience a downturn. Andrew Grove would say, think about the downturn every day. Go to sleep worried about the next downturn. Go to sleep worried about the challenges. Now, I am not advocating that you drive your own anxiety and stress level up, but I am saying there's a certain level of healthy stress, healthy anxiety that leaders of organizations, leaders of departments and divisions, leaders of geographic regions, honestly, even leaders of small teams should constantly be thinking about what's next. What might not be going as well as I hope it will? What might the blind spots be? So we're advocating for leaders to be a little more proactive in terms of their worry and paranoia. So take a quick pause, have a bit of coffee. Even if you are, let's imagine that it was 6 months ago or it is today, and you're highly motivated to evolve your strategy or evolve your leadership style or evolve in some way in response to these economic challenges. Uh, we'll assume that for a moment, but why is it so challenging? If we all agree that, hey, because of the external circumstances, we should shift in this way or shift in that way. If we agree and we're highly motivated, one would think it should happen relatively easily and quickly. However, there are a number of challenges that get in the way of that evolution. Number one, every single one of us is experiencing a sense of cognitive overload or overwhelm. Um, the fact that we have emails coming in, text messages coming in, tasks and projects, Teams meetings, virtual meetings. There's so much information flowing at us day in and day out. Contrasting this, if you go, I guess I have the benefit of having lived in the workplace for well over 30 years. I go back in my mind 30 years ago and I think about the flow of information that was coming at me 30 years ago. Even when I worked in a fairly uh, high information technical environment, I worked in the nuclear industry as a reactor engineer. Even then, that flow of information was not what it is today. And we are experiencing a level of cognitive overload, information coming at us, projects coming at us. We may not even be aware of the cognitive overload because we've just gotten used to it. It's like the frog, the proverbial frog in the kettle where the water gets warmer and warmer and warmer. And suddenly the frog is boiling without even realizing that it is boiling. That can, in fact, be a challenge for many of us where we're experiencing cognitive overload, but we don't know or we don't recognize that we're experiencing that overload. All that we really know is it's a little harder to pay attention. It's a little harder to get our people to pay attention. It's a little harder to focus, or maybe we're a little more tired than we used to be. Maybe we get worn down a little more easily. There are lots of very subtle indicators of cognitive overload, and trying to be a discerning, strategic thinker when you are experiencing this unconscious cognitive overload can be very challenging. And it doesn't help that we have these phones on us 7/24 all the time. Again, just filling our minds with information, with entertainment, with business news, with social news, with commercial news, and some of it all mixed together. It's amazing how we can end up being, again, cognitively overloaded without even realizing that we're cognitively overloaded. And sometimes there's as much disinformation as there is information. So discerning between what's real, what is opinion, what is active disinformation, that can be challenging as well. So when we say evolving as a leader during times of economic uncertainty, another element of cognitive overload is there was a time when the workplace was fairly homogenous, where people tended to dress the same, they tended to speak the same, they tended to have similar points of view. So, of course, there were differences, but the differences were all within a range. The world today, and I do view this as a positive, the world today is far more diverse. Employees today are far more diverse. 5 generations in the workplace, lots of different points of view, lots of different ways of thinking, and the diversity goes well beyond racial and gender and cultural diversity. There is family diversity, economic diversity, there is neurodiversity. There are lots of different diversities. And someone said to me a few days ago, he said, I think the reason the workplace feels more diverse today than it did in previous decades is that people just feel more comfortable coming to work as themselves. Many people could easily, put on a suit or, put on a certain look to look more homogenous. But he said, we actually have made it easier and more accepting for people to come to work as themselves. But it does create a leadership challenge in that leading a team of broad, diverse employees, it contributes to the cognitive overload. Again, I'm going to go back to this screen. As leaders, we've just got so much flowing through our heads when someone says, okay, I want you to be more discerning. I want you to see the thunderstorm in the distance. You may just not have the mind capacity, the brain capacity to look off into the distance and see what's coming because you're dealing with your day-to-day reality right now. So much is happening. Well, I do want to share with you one of the benefits of having written the book Workplace Poker is I get still to this day, I get letters from employees almost on a daily basis. And because that book was written about navigating the political waters in the workplace, almost all of the letters are about presenting me with some particular issue or challenge that people are experiencing, or they're just describing their workplace issues. And I tried an experiment with ChatGPT. I went back post-pandemic. I looked at all of the emails, all of the text messages, everything that I had received from people who were describing their particular workplace challenge, and I copied and pasted all of that into a single Word document. And it ended up being over 200 pages. 200 pages of distinct workplace issues and challenges. And then I asked ChatGPT to read all 200 pages, which it did amazingly in less than, I think it was 90 seconds. But I asked it to give me the themes that are coming out from this, the things that are repeated again and again. And these are the exact themes that ChatGPT produced for me. And this may resonate with you. It may not resonate with you, but it absolutely resonates with the hundreds upon hundreds of employees who have reached out to me post-pandemic just to describe some of the challenges that they're experiencing in the workplace. First of all, an emotionally exhausting workplace. Employees aren't just tired. And I know I'm going to speak as if I'm speaking about everybody. And I know there are, of course, exceptions to this. But I'm saying, broadly speaking, employees are tired and disillusioned. Their emotional labor is invisible. They are working on their projects, but sometimes the work they're doing is deeply draining, especially in environments that ignore the cost of nonstop pressure to perform. So there's emotional exhaustion. There's a communication breakdown, not exactly poor communication, but mostly a communication disconnect where employees feel like their leaders don't get them, their leaders don't connect with them. Sometimes they don't feel like they can trust the information that's being shared by leaders. A leadership vacuum, meaning mid-level leaders are overloaded. Sometimes they feel unprepared. Many people are opting out. I've heard from numerous people who say, look, I was offered a management position. I'm an individual contributor. I was offered a management position and I decided to decline it because I see how unhappy the other managers are. I see how frustrated the other leaders are. So I'm just going to keep doing what I do because I enjoy my work. So when you have this leadership vacuum that's being created, um, there are a number of employees who refer to DEI efforts as being more about branding and marketing than actual inclusion efforts. And I'm not saying this about any of you on this call. Obviously, those of you on this call, each of you has your own unique situation. But from those hundreds of employees who responded to me and shared their specifics, there were lots of mentions of organizations where the language of inclusion is used as part of their internal and external marketing, but the reality was that, in fact, I took a note here where they said diversity is talked about but not lived. Inequity and bias remain unaddressed, making DEI feel like branding and not real change. And in some cases, DEI has gotten a bad rap. If you pay attention to the political environment, in some cases, DEI is getting absolutely eviscerated, and mostly from people who don't even understand what DEI is. It's amazing how you hear world leaders talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as if it's an evil thing, and yet they really don't understand the value of inclusion in the workplace. So performative inclusion was one of the key themes that came out of this. A dehumanizing tech culture was another key theme, meaning, hey, it's great that AI drives productivity. It's great, depending on whose research you buy into, AI can boost productivity 30% to 60% for most employees. But if leaders are expecting, oh, okay, I'm going to boost employee productivity leveraging AI by 50%, that means I don't need all of you, and it means those of you who remain, I can expect a 50% boost in your productivity. So just do more, do more, do more. There's a true dehumanizing element of that kind of technology culture where just because the technology moves faster, we expect the humans to move faster as well. Um, Lots of commentary about chaos as the operating model, meaning, we're shifting, we're changing, we're evolving so rapidly. Today's plan is not tomorrow's plan. Yesterday's plan is not today's plan. Leaders who are consistently changing plans, changing strategies, etc. And then finally, disengagement from one-sided caring, meaning it's not enough for me, the employee, to care about the organization. Yes, I want to care. I want to work for an organization whose mission I care about, but the caring has to be reciprocal. It has to be two-way. And the younger generations in particular feel very strongly, and they're very discerning about the degree to which the organizations they go to work for actually do care about them. Caring is not about snacks in the break room. Caring is not about the surface level communication. Caring generally is about how does your manager treat you? How does your manager engage with you? And how is your manager supported by the overall organization? So the reason I share all of this, and I realize I've dumped a lot on you just on this one slide. There's a lot there. But when we talk about, I'm going to go back to this. When we talk about evolving as a leader in the face of a downward economy, in the face of economic challenges, and you're being overwhelmed by information and misinformation, this is one of the contributors to that overwhelm. There's a lot happening in your workplace, and it can feel overwhelming. So how do employees typically respond? And I know this is overgeneralization, but if you find yourself in meetings where you just don't get the energy from your employees that you wish you would get. You don't get the engagement from your teams that you wish you would get. You don't get the innovative ideas that you wish you would get. It isn't necessarily a lack of motivation or even a lack of engagement. It can very well be fear. What you see in some employees' eyes or in their manner can be fear and uncertainty. They're not sure what to do. They don't know how to go into this battle. They're not sure that they can win with this battle. So sometimes the look of apathy is actually masking something else. It's masking fear, doubt, uncertainty, or other things. So it's an important, as a leader in a down economy, for you not just to assume that because people appear on the surface to be disengaged, that they're in fact disengaged. I would say in most cases, they're not disengaged at all. They're very engaged and they're very worried and they're trying to figure out, what do I do about my career? What do I do about my plans? What about my next 10 years? Is this the time to go to LinkedIn and start looking, start jumping ship? How do I navigate these waters? They're worried about a lot of things, and it's important, I think, as a leader to discern the difference between apathy and some of these other emotions. Um, you are going to have, and it's not just the younger generations, it is older generations of workers as well. You will have generations of workers who might have 5 years left, 10 years left, and they're wondering, how do I navigate this next 5 years? How do I get this next 3 years? How do I get this next 10 years? And there's no obvious answer in front of them. So they experience anxiety as well. And sometimes that anxiety gets reflected in arguments. Sometimes that anxiety gets reflected in disagreements. So again, I would just say, as you observe your employees, um, it would be helpful to be hyper discerning, more discerning than ever, paying attention to the details more than ever. And in fact, I don't have an image for this, but I would also be on the lookout for over agreement. You may experience employees. In fact, I've seen several meetings where the employees were absolutely all on board, all engaged, all appeared to be highly motivated. But what they were actually doing was they were overcompensating. They were overcompensating um, out of a sense of concern, out of a sense of paranoia, out of a sense of worry about their own safety in the workplace, their own security in the workplace. So as a leader, it's important that you recognize your potential for blind spots and discern very carefully what's really happening with people. And it is not as simple as going to your people and saying, "Hey, how are you doing? What's going on?" Because most of the time, people do filter what they say to their leaders. They view the leaders in a bit of a bubble, and we're cautious and careful, and so as a leader, it's on your shoulders to look through the bubble. If you can minimize the bubble can never go away. It's always going to be there as long as you have some degree of control over other people's destinies. They're going to be to some degree careful about you and careful about their communications with you. But you can minimize that bubble and create a bit more transparency. And what an economic downturn does, because this exists in every workplace, in every environment, in every economy. The economic downturn amplifies it. It makes it stronger. It makes it more likely to be happening. So it is incumbent upon you as a leader to dial up your awareness, to dial up your level of attention. So I'm going to take up just a pause just to see if there are any thoughts or comments. And I apologize that this communication via chat versus an actual workshop, is a little cumbersome, but it is what it is. It's the nature of these webinar environments. But I'm just looking to see if there are any commentary. I don't see any right now. Um, uh,
Yes, we have one comment there, Dan, wherein Justina wants a bit of more detailed summary on the insights which you have provided for employees' perspective. So
Fantastic. So what
we'll
I'll
get
do,
back to her on that.
this specific slide, Justina, I've got notes for this. And what I'll do is I'll make sure we provide the slide deck to everybody who attends, that's so that we've got the details. And here's what I love about the data set that produced this is that it's a very current data set. It's all post-pandemic, and because it's a direct communication from these employees to me, it feels very real, very immediate, very relevant. It's not been processed through anybody's filter of any kind. So I will absolutely share that with you. Now, one more thing that's making our approach to an economic downturn challenging is AI. And this is not a webinar on AI, so we're not going to take the time to dive deep into AI. But when you really think about leadership and AI, there are 6 areas of competency that a leader, if you're leveraging AI in your business, ideally should have. There are tactical AI skills, like using AI in your day-to-day world. There are strategic AI insights. How do you think about AI from a big picture standpoint? There are cultural issues, the culture within your organization that supports AI, your culture regarding how AI is used. How is AI creating competitive advantage? There's a defensive element to AI. How do you use AI to defend yourself? And that's related to security as well. Because when you have all of your employees or a good number of your employees leveraging AI, there are security issues and compliance issues that come along with that as well. So the entire world of AI competencies, I'm going to go back to this. It contributes to this sense of it's so complex. There's so much happening. There's so much that I have to get my head around. You mean I have to learn AI? I have to understand AI. I have to understand people. Man, it's a lot. I have to understand different generations, different cultures, different ways of communicating, plus AI, plus, plus, plus. And I think of it as you've probably heard the term 3D chess. Someone said, there's just so much. It's like playing 3D chess, only more. And that person, they actually coined the term, it's like 3D chess on steroids. It's like more complex than even a 3D chess game. So I use this image just to reflect, what it's like to play chess on a completely new and different kind of chessboard. We do have to, as leaders, evolve to think more deeply about our people, more deeply about our strategy, more deeply about our competitors even, and more deeply about our customers. It's as if all of the things that we know are on our task list or on our job list as leaders, every single one of them is being impacted by this new world where things are moving faster, things are more complex. Yes, we have more resources, but we also have more competitive pressures. And so I know that's a big ask. Asking leaders to be more in virtually every area, it does require self-reflection. It does require time, and I'm going to ask each of you to take the time in the coming week or weeks to just self-reflect and ask yourself, how am I meeting the moment? What are my gaps? Because we know that stagnant leaders tend to produce stagnant teams. But leaders that see you grow and evolve, leaders that see you embrace experiments and ideas, leaders that see certain characteristics from you will tend to model or mirror those same characteristics. So leading in a down economy, it's more than just boosting sales. Although that would be nice. It would be nice if we could boost sales. And for those of you who are hyper focused on how do I adjust the economic downturn, let me just say, come to next week's session on selling up in a down economy, because we're going to focus very specifically on the sales behaviors that need to evolve, and we'll get very tactical regarding specific sales behaviors that can help you actually gain more business in a down economy. For now, we're focusing on leadership capabilities and this stress that we are all under. The natural reaction to stress is to close in and not evolve and not change. But I'm going to ask you to leverage that stress energy toward creating a new you, a deeper you, a more evolved you. Because as I said before, you're evolving more than just for yourself. You are evolving for yourself and to create a model for the people around you. So if people find that your reaction to an economic circumstance is to be more thoughtful, is to be more open, is to be more human, is to be smarter and more strategic, they will evolve in that direction as well. But if your reaction is to be more controlling, more micromanaging, more worried, more crabby, more stressed, the same thing will happen with the people around her. There will be a butterfly effect. So, as leaders, whether it's fair or not, um, people do take their cues from us. And this is true at the factory floor level as well as the C suite. If you're leading a team of 6 on the front line, you may not think of yourself as super uber leader, but in fact, for those 6 people, you are the most important leader in their environment, and they will take their cues from you. So, in the last few minutes, I'm going to run through some thoughts and some ideas on how to boost your everyday strategy evolution, how to shift and be a bit more innovative in a practical way. Even though you may feel overwhelmed, even though you may have fewer resources. And Kiara, I absolutely agree with your comment that there definitely is a need for more empathy and consideration of others, even when we don't. Yes, even when we don't agree, even if we know they are not correct, or at least we're highly certain that they are not correct. Engaging with them with empathy is going to be more critical, and if there is a circumstance where we have to lay off people, how we handle those layoffs is so important, because those people, we're not just laying off those people. We are doing that, but others are observing. Others see what we're doing. Others hear about. In fact, this morning, I spoke with someone who said to me, this is why they told me I was laid off, but I know for a fact it was this other reason. And so this person left their organization, and the last thing their organization did for them or to them was tell them a lie, to say, hey, we're laying you off for this reason, but in fact, it wasn't the case. And that lie, if I believe this person at their word, got communicated broadly to lots of employees within that organization, because these employees, we live in a world today where people are connected on LinkedIn. People are connected via social media. So 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I remember being laid off. I've been laid off in my life. And once I was laid off, man, my connection with those coworkers was minimal, because it was uncomfortable, of course, but there wasn't an easy way. Now people are laid off. They get lots of LinkedIn messages from the colleagues that they worked really well with. They stay connected for long periods of time. So those employees don't go away. Not only do they not go away, but they also stick around, and they will post things on Glassdoor. They'll post things in other social media places. So if we don't handle the layoffs effectively, the way we handle those layoffs will oftentimes come back to bite us. So here in the next 7 minutes are my principles for driving innovation, even in the face of being overwhelmed, even in the face of economic uncertainty, even in the face of unlimited resources. And I apologize in advance. I'm going to be going through this information relatively quickly. This would normally be, just this section on innovation would be about 2 hours of content with lots of interaction, lots of dialogue and discussion, lots of rolling up our sleeves and talking about what this means for your organization. But I want to share the principles, and then I'll make sure I include in the notes before we distribute this. I'm going to go back through the notes and make sure that the notes are well filled out, so that you can get the PowerPoint, you can read through the notes and have this as a ongoing resource, if that makes sense. Anna Fain, it's so good to see you. I didn't realize you were on the call. That's excellent. I'm looking forward to you and I talking in the not too distant future. So, principle number 1, be the ball. If anyone can name the movie from which this phrase originated, we're going back several decades, but there'll be a prize for the first person who can name it. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds for somebody to name the movie. Okay, Leslie is yes, Leslie. Excellent. It's good to know that Caddyshack is still relevant in today's world. But what we mean by be the ball is take the time to be the downturn, to experience, to internalize what is happening, because many of us always see our numbers and we react to the numbers. And then we attempt to build a strategy reacting to the numbers. If you take the time to really center in on exactly what is happening, how is this economic uncertainty impacting not just our employees, but our clients and customers, our competitors, the broader world or market overall? What is actually happening? If you give it time, you are much more likely to have an effective strategy change or an effective change in your own demeanor and behavior if you've taken the time to be the ball in the first place. I already said start sooner. So the ideal time, as we said before, the ideal time is to start when the thunderclouds are off in the distance, not when the storm is right upon you, when you can. Now, that doesn't change things today. If the storm is upon you today, that's what we've got. The other principle is to try little experiments and try them faster. So as people share thoughts and ideas with you, if you put all the pressure on a single experiment or a single answer or a single solution, man, that's a lot of pressure. Whereas if you actually work with your team to brainstorm a dozen different micro experiments, we're going to try lots of different things. You can experiment faster. You can learn from those experiments. You can fail from those experiments, and you can fail fast and learn from the failing. So the key to experimenting isn't to put weeks or months of thought into our one new strategy. It's instead to say, what might be a dozen experiments? Maybe they're new product experiments. Maybe they're new process experiments. Maybe they're new customer engagement experiments. Maybe they're new employee engagement or employee connection experience. Maybe it's all of those things. Let's try all of those things in relatively safe ways where if it doesn't work out, if that experiment happens to not succeed, the downside is not that huge, and we learn. We learn no matter what. I have one client company that currently, as we speak, has 8 different employee engagement experiments going on. There are lots of little different, like micro efforts, micro engagements. They're not expecting that everything is going to work, but they're going to pay careful attention to what is working and what's not working. And then they're going to continue to evolve and evolve and evolve. You analyze and implement, you learn from your experiments and repeat the process. The next principle, and this is probably the most challenging principle, because when we are uncertain, we don't want to rock the boat. When we are uncertain, we just want to do things that are tried and true. We don't want to make mistakes. But now might be the time to rock the boat. Now might be the time to say, what if we make a dramatic shift, a dramatic change? What if, and I'm not advocating any particular change, but now is the time to at least contemplate the dramatic shift, the dramatic change. What if we enter into an entirely new market? What if we exit an existing market? What if we pull resources? What if we push resources? But let's at least contemplate dramatic shifts. And the same is true with our own personal behavior as leaders. I will tell you this, and I'm looking at the clock because I want to be respectful of your time. Up until my mid-30s, I was Mr. Hard charging, hard driving, hard pushing, young, energetic leader. And I look back now and I'm a little uncomfortable with the behavior then, but I was a driver, drive. And I had an executive coach who was fantastic and who rocked my boat and helped me understand that what I was doing, essentially my ambition was getting in the way of my ambition. He confronted me with the reality that, Dan, you've topped out. So you've done great, but you are flatlining now. You've reached the limits of this hard driving approach, and it's not going to produce excuse me, it's not going to produce the same results that it must subconsciously be an emotional moment, because I'm remembering this, and it was a very hard conversation. And I had to those of you who do know me, you know I'm a little bit neurodiverse, and change is hard. But I realized I had to evolve to be much more of a human to the humans that I was leading, and it wasn't easy. It did rock my leadership boat, and in fact, is the result of the next 15 or 20 years, and the continuous progression from there. So perhaps rock your personal boat, perhaps rock your organization's boat. I've got an example. I'll just include this in the PowerPoint. I've got an example of how the Lego organization constantly rocks their boat. They're constantly trying new experiments, and there's some great information from Lego about that, so I'll include that. The same is true. I've got some information on stretching mental boundaries, like really stretching your boundaries, not just pushing yourself a little bit. But there's a great example from an organization called Johnny Cupcakes. Johnny Cupcakes is a fantastic business. And in fact, if you walk into a Johnny Cupcakes, you could be forgiven for thinking that it's a bakery. But in fact, whenever Johnny Cupcakes has a launch of a new location, they have big promotions. They have big crowds who show up. They have found that about half of the crowds who show up think they're showing up for a bakery. The other half recognize the actual business that they're in. When people walk in to Johnny Cupcakes, they find out that, oh, they sell T-shirts. They sell interesting T-shirts that are very creative and a little obviously humorous, et cetera, et cetera. So Johnny Cupcakes occasionally does have somebody walking in and then getting annoyed because there are in fact no cupcakes at Johnny Cupcakes. But that innovative approach to marketing gets them so much free publicity that it's actually worth the downside. So we are now right at the bottom of the hour, and as you can see, I have a little more content to go through. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and make sure that the notes are carefully written, so that to the degree that I have grabbed you and you think there is value here, you can read through those notes and you can continue to gain value. I respect your time. I thank you so much for your willingness to engage in this. And let me once again say, this whole one-way communication thing, very uncomfortable for me, as I'm sure it is for you, because we're all used to more of a facilitated dialogue, but it is what it is. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and perhaps we'll talk again soon. Bye now.
And just one more thing, we have 4 webinar series in 4 webinar in this series, and our next webinar is coming up next week, Thursday, same time. And the title of that webinar, as Dan said, is Sell Up in a Down Economy. So we are looking forward to have you there as well.
And then after that, the final is Think Up in a Down Economy. So it's a great series of 4. And I think we have the recordings available too,
Yes.
Somnath. Is that right? So,
yes.
People who can't make it can actually still experience the whole series of 4. Fantastic. Sure. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dan. Please take care.
Bye.